What's up, everyone? If you don't know me, my name is Denzel Mensah. I'm a certified personal development, life, and relationship coach. I'm also an ENFJ, 911, social sexual in the Myers-Briggs and Enneagram system, which is going to be very relevant to this video. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that I often already love to talk about, and I've been continuing to gain nuance and thought and calibration in. And this topic is intimacy. And to make it even more clear, reimagining intimacy, the vision for intimacy, and why sometimes, at least for me as an ENFJ, speaking for myself, why an ENFJ can sometimes be a little bit or appear a little bit more socially clumsy than we would expect for them to be. Let's get it. Okay, so I've been having a lot of thoughts lately. I've been having a lot of life experiences. I've been revising a lot of mistakes, a lot of intentional accidents, just a lot of things in general. A lot of social dynamics, both ones I'm involved in, ones I'm not involved in, but I'm coaching other people with, ones that I notice and witness, ones that I'm told about, ones that I see on TV, which honestly speaking, I feel like this is why sometimes gossip is helpful, because it gives you real experiences to then psychoanalyze in a way. You hear about these real experiences, and it depends on what you do. There's good gossip, there's bad gossip, there's harmful gossip, there's neutral gossip, and there's even helpful gossip. Like if I'm spreading rumors about how well somebody does at a job or something like that and what they did, then anyway, you get the point. So with all of these thoughts, I've been just thinking about certain things, and I had come to a stop a few weeks ago, or a break a few weeks ago, where I was really just thinking to myself, and I kind of always have this thought surface every now and then, but this time it was major, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I'm socially deviant. I just, I feel like I am just, especially as of recent years, my mind just can't help but counter and think against every social norm and all these things, and criticize it and get to the why behind it, and boom, boom. That can lead me into waters that I probably should not be in, but also at the same time, depending on how you look at it, I probably should be in because of what I'm about to talk about here. I was talking to a good friend of mine about this. And when I didn't go into detail, but, I just pretty much had told her, as we're catching up, I'm like, yeah, I just feel socially deviant a lot of times, and, boom, boom. And something that she said stuck out to me. Oh, and by the way, I don't think you're some deviant person. Foolish in navigating some things at times, yes. However, I'm thankful you've even shared this much. And she edited the text message. I read it before she sent it. I think that it actually said beforehand something foolish in how you navigate certain social situations, or boom, boom. And that was what stood out to me, because I love how Antonia Dodge of Personality Hacker, she often talks about how originally, because we're still learning about type and everything, we're still navigating and understanding patterns. So originally, old days, we used to think SE DOMs, so ESFPs and ESTPs, and even ISFPs and ISTPs, with the SC as an auxiliary function. SE being extroverted sensing, which is all about being in the moment, being very in tune with your body, seeing things for what they are, being aesthetically inclined, and taking action, responding fast, etc. The SPs have the monopoly on this because they're either their first or their second strongest function. And so from that, we had the belief that the SP types are pretty much the least clumsy. And in many situations, this is the case. But then we've come to find out that there are people who are definitely SP types, but they can appear clumsy. And what Antonia and Joel have realized was that, oh, it's because they actually feel that safe and comfortable, like in their bodies. And so it's almost like, yeah, there are SE types that are very aware of whatever is going on, but there are also some SE types, and some of you who watch my profiling sessions, you might notice this, where they might not be like completely aware of everything that's going on, but then when you ask them the follow-up question, like, oh, well, do you feel like it's because maybe like if something were to happen, you could respond to it quickly? They're, oh yeah, that for sure. Then it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense, whereas like maybe somebody who's like having SE as an inferior function, such as like an INFJ or an INTJ, they might be like, yeah, I catch everything that's going on. And it's because they, having NI as a dominant function, they're not that quick to respond to things. And so they have to remain super, super vigilant and alert, extra vigilant and alert, because if something catches them off guard, then they don't know how to respond that quickly. So the reason why I bring that up is because Antonia also says that when we get insulted in our dominant function, then we're just kind of like, yeah, okay. But the lower that it goes and the more that we start to be like, oh my gosh, which is very true for me. Like if I'm insulted in my TI, then it's like, ah. But if I'm insulted in my FE, it will always make me be like, I wonder what led this person to this conclusion. But at the end of the day, it's like I see how well I do with FE in like almost every other situation. I'm like, okay, yeah, this few things, yeah, I could see how that was not my smartest FE thing or whatever like that, but I don't suck at FE, like, come on, kind of thing. And so when my friend said this thing about like, being socially clumsy or, just something like that here and there, because of these few instances that I might have shared with her, I started to think about the pattern of these things. And I realized, and to like just bring in even like further patterns, I'm really into like archetypes. So I really do like to use the archetypes of astrology and zodiac signs. And so for those of you who are very big into astrology, I'm a Sagittarius sun, I'm an Aquarius moon, and I'm a Libra rising. And then I have not only a Scorpio north node, but then I also have a Scorpio stellium. So when you put all of that together on top of being an ENFJ 9-winged 1 social sexual, you get someone who's very iconoclastic. Because with this Libra rising, it's like I do come off very affable and very kind and very loving and warm and all of that, which is all really how I am and how I view myself. But then you'll get this like as you get closer, you get this Sagittarius side of me that's like very big on like, being both like the student and the teacher and the philosopher and the gypsy and wanting to explore and learn more and get to my most primal state, half man, half beast kind of thing. And just wanting to have this kind of freedom and shoot far and really explore like what is it like that makes us humans, like what is our most primal things, you know what I mean? And then when you get to the Aquarius side, especially like with the moon, there's so much to go with that. But it's like really like revolutionary, like a revolutionary heart at the heart of everything. And combining that with the Libra, it's like you're going to take a more thoughtful and careful approach with how you move with everything. But then you bring all of this Scorpio energy from the North Node and from the stellium, and now you're diving into all of these esoteric, all of these spiritual, all these dark, even taboo kinds of things. And so when you put all of that together, it really makes for like a very interesting type of psyche, if I can say so for myself, on top of, again, being an ENFJ and just the experiences that I've had. So when I think about the situations that have led me to appear socially clumsy and, just not even, whatever, as I looked at those patterns, I realized they were all moments in where I was intentionally trying to push the boundaries, not in a disrespectful way, but naturally, I always have this vision of what I believe personally that the ultimate form of intimacy is like. And it's an ideal, being an NF type idealist. I made a video years ago on the carrot of idealism. If you haven't seen it yet, I advise go checking it out. But essentially, to summarize it, it's this notion of how we've all seen a donkey, those cartoons, the donkey, where they put the carrot in front of the donkey and then the donkey is just going and he's never going to get the carrot, or she, you know. But anyway, like the donkey is never going to get the carrot. However, what if the donkey were to look back and see how much ground that the donkey has covered in trying to pursue that carrot, then the donkey may realize, if it had consciousness in the sense of, you know, being able to, like the intelligence, able to understand these things, that, oh, wow, maybe the purpose of the carrot, which in this metaphor or analogy is the ideal, is not to necessarily attain the carrot, but the carrot is to motivate and encourage me to continue to move further and further and further. The belief that I will one day get the carrot is what pushes me closer and closer and closer. When you shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you still might land amongst the stars. That kind of mindset. So it's like this vision of, in the back of my mind, I have this paradoxical awareness of like, yeah, this might never happen, but it could, but it might never happen, of what intimacy can look like, and the ultimate form of intimacy, according to my own personal thoughts and everything. And how we can incrementally push to that level. Of course, it'll take certain types of people, certain types of generations, certain types of interactions, and things need to be cultivated in certain types of ways before you're able to get to that point. For those of you who've been following my channel, you've seen a lot of my videos before where I talk about love a lot. You know, like I talk about the power of love. I talk about being receptive to love. I talk about platonic intimacy, which is such a real thing that a lot of people are not very much aware of. And then I talk about, you know, like there's romantic love, you know, the 8 different forms of love the Greeks talk about, you know, like there's so much things that involve love. And then even now exploring, you know, like like things like, you know, same-sex attraction when it goes into that. And then even like with polyamory, just all of these things, like there's so much to this topic of love and interpersonal dynamics. And being an FE dominant, interpersonal connections is the most interesting thing to me. And then having NI as an auxiliary function, especially the patterns behind it, the meaning behind these interpersonal dynamics, as well as how can we push to the next level, is where I'm at. A visionary, in my opinion, is never quite satisfied with where we are currently. They can be content with it. They can be happy with it. Like right now, I'm happy with where we are as a society. But I can also see how much more that can be fixed, that can be done. And not that I'm God's gift to earth, but in continuing to contemplate these things and continuing to find out where I, as a cog in the system of the fabric of society, can continue to help, even if it's just one individual at a time, whether through my coaching, whether through my YouTube videos, whether through Instagram, or whether through even just like being a husband in a certain way, like whether the people that I talk to, like, you know, at my, at work, or you know, whatever it might be, these are causing ripples that then those people then interact with other people, and things continue to progress forward, and eventually seeds are planted to then create the kind of garden that in my idealist visionary mind, we are now cultivating. All of this goes back to intimacy. And I think that that's why sometimes me as an ENFJ, even being as socially savvy as I am, even being as very much aware of the social norms that are placed forward, I still will challenge those social norms, not just with speaking out against them, not just with having discussions about dissecting them, but also knowing, okay, in most, like 99% of social situations, this thing would not be okay. But in this very specific dynamic, I'm not certain if it would still stand as not being okay. But I'm going to try this anyway. And if I try it, I'm going to see how this works, because I, again, give homage, whatever the word is, to Antonia Dodge for bringing up how TE, extroverted thinking, as a function is always looking for the weak points in a system, because in knowing the weak points, it knows where also the strong points are and how to strengthen the weak points. So extroverted thinking is always like poking and prodding in a system to find out, okay, where's the weakest point and how can we strengthen it? And it's the same thing with FE. Where are the weakest points in our society when it comes to interpersonal dynamics, that we can strengthen them? Where are our strongest points and how can we advance those even further? Especially as an NFJ type, that's all that you're thinking about. My INFJ friends, like, I know that y'all know about this. And for INFJs, for them, it's a little bit differently because we operate similarly, but you guys will spend even more time, from what I've noticed, contemplating and thinking about this stuff and just like, really going into the depth of it within your own mind and observing. But then when actually like putting it into practice and coming out there with it, because of the lack of SE, then it takes you a little bit longer to really throw it out there and all that. And I have a whole bunch of videos on ENFJ versus INFJ, and so you guys can go check that out. But as an ENFJ with tertiary SE, it's like, okay, I do spend a lot of time thinking about this, but then I'm like ready to test it out in the field. It's like, okay, I want to see how this works. And in order to do that, I have to take the risks with interpersonal dynamics. And it's not like my interpersonal dynamics are just hamsters that I'm just like, ooh, let me just, whatever. But it's like, okay, I like this dynamic and I really want to continue to push it to the next level. I want to continue to challenge it. I don't want stagnancy. I want us to continue to grow deeper in intimacy. And in doing this, I'm aware that it might end up collapsing or breaking. And unfortunately, this might cause now like, oh, wow, well, I had to risk this dynamic in order to do this. But now I've learned some of the ways in which maybe not to go about things in a certain dynamic when you're trying to push it to this level. Just like when you're using TE and you're working with systems. Oh, okay, now I've learned maybe next time I build such a system, don't do it this way. Instead, do it this way. Or maybe this can't even be done at all. Or maybe cultivate or like build this type of system in this way. So with people or interpersonal dynamics, okay, try to cultivate this type of dynamic first before you try this kind of thing. Wait this long amount of time. Have this type of conversation. Be a little bit more specific in this way. Try not to have this type of history, etc. All right. So with all of that said and put forward, I'm going to talk to you now about what this ideal intimacy even is. So continuing to speak to this same friend of mine, we started to talk about like what intimacy is. And so the friend of mine said something I was thinking about. When you say you're always seeing the future of how dynamics can be closer and better than how things are currently, how do you go about determining that? Are you sure that what you see as better is congruent with what others may see as better? I said, congruent? No, that's usually the point. I often find that people don't even know how to be closer and more intimate. They just say they want to be, and then when I create a path, most get scared of that reality. I think it's an ideal for most, but not a practice. So now I just save my energy for people I see that could withstand that and truly desire it. But yeah, I do know what I see creates more trust and openness, vulnerability, depth, consistency, safety, etc. I'm certain. And then my friend said, well, how does being closer and more intimate look like practically and being expressed? Can you provide examples in general? I said, I think practically speaking, it involves an endless exploration of each other. So that would mean trust, a safe enough space provided, even if progressively, to where both are curious about the other person enough to ask genuine questions and have an endless, because ideally both people are always growing and learning more about themselves as they encounter the world head on. Journey to understand them deeper while also holding space for them, meaning they don't just listen, but they actually affirm even if they disagree, which is different. Affirming is understanding why a person may think or feel how they feel, and then at the very least, showing that whether you relate or not, you are there to continue to understand to the best of your ability and love them anyway as they do the same. Consistency also. Sure, don't speak every day if it can't be semi-frequent and quality, meaningful time spent. And then my ideal is that ultimate intimacy is comfort to the level of being nonchalant in almost any situation. Whatever the person says, does, or expresses, it can be freely done without it being a big deal. Even being naked in front of each other, like casually changing in front of the other, without it being weird or even much attention drawn to it. And if such attention is drawn, it's nonchalant too, like a flirty, playful vibe that doesn't get overthought or misconstrued. But, that's very important. I get how that's again just an ideal. Lastly, I think that with such an ideal, jealousy may still be a thing here and there, but can't last because you're so secure in your spot with the person that you just know another person can't take it, because in such a dynamic, you're showing up fully, meaning that no one can be you. Therefore, they can't replace you. But it's easier to be replaced if you're not showing up fully. And sometimes we don't show up fully because we fear this vulnerability. So then we don't take up much space, and that space gets filled by someone else. I hope that makes sense. It's the best way I can describe it in words while at work. So with all that said, the friend then asked a very, very, very good question. She said, do you think boundaries can exist in your ideal? I just wonder if when boundaries or lines do exist for someone where it doesn't exist for you, it would appear that you interpret that limitation as a lack of closeness. So then I just ponder on what the implications of that could be, both positive and negative. I also wonder what it would look like if what you deem as closeness could be reframed according to each person's capacity and developing a gratitude for them sharing and engaging to their fullest. Even if in comparison you may have a gallon and they have a teacup. I believe there can be closeness and appreciation of them giving their 100% and being okay with what's presented currently until you can find fellow gallons. Unless you already do that, then never mind. Which, yes, I do already do that, so there's that. I said, as for boundaries, I'm under the belief that they mainly exist to protect us, and if we are in a relationship where we are intimate and we trust enough, boundaries are way less needed, and we trust one another enough to vocalize and not fear it will impact the dynamic. So then she asked, so then how would you avoid becoming enmeshed? Now I'd heard that word before, but I wanted us to define the terms of what this meant. So then I said, it's not to say, so then she sent the description of it and everything. And I said, I have a lot to say on this, but in short, I low-key don't believe it exists in the way we think when in a healthy dynamic, because the other person would know not to do that since we are prioritizing the other being. Totally. I just can't see someone losing who they are in a dynamic if the other person is constantly bringing who they are out to the table and encouraging them to live authentically and loudly. This will then also encourage making decisions with full autonomy. There won't be a fear of, what if Denzel doesn't like this? They can trust regardless I'll support, or at the very least, still love them. But to be enmeshed would be if I were to be afraid to show up in the dynamic fully. And so I'm now hiding to be comfortable and not lose the person. That's still insecure. But if I'm not afraid to, it means I'm not in perpetual fear of losing the person. Not because I don't care, but because I'm secure that their love abounds even and especially when I'm fully myself, which encourages me to keep being more myself, therefore also not dependent on them. Now that conversation went on for a much longer while. And eventually the friend pretty much asked the question of well, what about, just the idea of boundaries and everything, kind of separating you from the other person in a way. The friend pretty much said will you see somebody just wanting to keep something to themselves as a barrier to intimacy? Which I answered honestly, yeah, a barrier. It doesn't mean that we're not intimate, but in my opinion, my personal opinion, yeah. I mean, if you want to keep something just for yourself, there's no issue with that. I want to emphasize that there is absolutely no issue with that. However, inevitably, it is a door that if we were to enter through that door, it would have led to an even deeper level of intimacy and understanding between us. But since you decided to keep that door closed and keep it for yourself, which is, again, totally fine, yes, it will provide as a barrier to intimacy. And that is also something that, for me, being who I am, I don't really resonate with. And again, it's not to say that it's bad if there are people who are like that. I do consider myself to be a private person, but I don't think that I'm a private person to the point where I want to just take all of these things with me to the grave. Idealistically speaking, if I had a friend or few that I trusted enough to not ridicule me, to not judge me, to not, just any of those things, to not spread whatever I'm about to say around, then yes, I would share all of these things. I don't think that I don't think that I personally gain any reward from just keeping such things to myself. If there is a person or people who, when it's relevant, especially, I feel free to share that with. So, but again, I know that that comes with being a person who is always considering and thinking about intimacy in the way that I do. I remember the second time that I was on shrooms, the person that I had done it with, the imagery and the energy of the environment was really giving me Garden of Eden. And the reason why I say that is because we were so out of the material in a way that we were connecting on a soul level, in a sense that, like, the person quite literally, like, usually they before this point at least, they were a lot more self-conscious and shy and stuff like that. But in this situation, I remember there was a specific point where, I'm only saying this just to, like, further drive my point, where they were like, "Oh, I have to pee." And I was like, "Okay." And I was, just going to allow them to go do whatever they do. It's like, "No, like, come." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And quite literally, like, I was just standing there at the door as they continued to speak all the thoughts that were coming to their head and everything. We were in a very deep conversation as they were just nonchalantly peeing. And I remember I was having, like, two brain things happening at the same time, which was, one, I was, like, very engaged in the discussion that we were already having. It was very esoteric in nature. It was very explorative. It was very connective. It was very conceptual. And it was bringing reality to it. But then on the other half of my mind, I was in the present thinking to myself, wow, this person is literally just casually peeing. just and they did like, and it made me, again, like, a social norm is like, oh yeah, obviously if somebody is going to go pee, like, you give them that privacy. And again, that's not a problem. But when I'm thinking about, like, the Garden of Eden, before Adam and Eve had to, like, clothe themselves, and before they were embarrassed with their naked bodies, they were nonchalant about the nakedness. They're like, oh yeah, I'm naked. Okay, so what? They didn't even seem really, like, aware of it, because it was like, what's the big deal? And we literally, a lot of things don't become a big deal until we make it a big deal. Certain things don't become awkward until we make it awkward. In that moment, if I decided to tell my friend, like, oh my gosh, like, bring attention to, like, the fact that they're peeing in that way, that would have been awkward. You know what I'm saying? But that was just not the energy. The friend felt comfortable to just be like, look, I have to pee, and we're really deep in conversation. I'm gonna just pee. We don't have to make this a big deal. We don't have to make this awkward and all that. We're gonna continue whatever we're talking about. As I pee, wash my hands, we step back out, and we continue on as if nothing ever happened. But that was a learning moment for me to experience, because being in that shroom state, that very spiritual consciousness state, and now almost like letting go of earthly tethers in a way of, like, oh, this is embarrassing, or oh, what about this? It's like, who cares? we are engaged in a very soulful conversation, and we don't have time, or we are on an intimate level enough to where we do not need boundaries here. We don't need a fence. We usually have fences in neighborhoods because we do not know. We don't know who's around. We don't know who's going to enter the neighborhood. So we want to protect our property, right? But if you idealistically lived in a neighborhood where you knew everybody very closely, they all knew you very closely, you all loved each other in that kind of sense, would there really actually be a need for a fence? Maybe there would be. Maybe somebody somebody who's watching might comment like, oh, actually. But my mind right now is like, again, like I was saying about the boundaries, boundaries are easiest to build with those that we do not like or that we do not get along with. However, because we're trying to protect ourselves from these people. But if you're really intimately engaged with the person who, again, is always encouraging you to be more and more your fullest self, as you also do the same, then are these boundaries really as necessary? I'm not saying that boundaries are a bad thing. I really want to make that clear. I'm not saying that boundaries are a bad thing. But in this ideal of intimacy, even something such as like going to freaking pee, there are couples who, and I'm not one of these people personally, this is the type of level that I'm not at, where one person can literally be defecating while the other partner is just brushing their teeth casually and they're talking. That's a different level of, I guess, intimacy and openness that I'm like, hey, I'm good. I can just wait, honestly, But obviously, like, that same person who's defecating would not allow almost anybody else in the bathroom, usually, other than their partner in that sense. So, of course, there are going to be people who are watching, well, there's certain things that we should only reserve for our romantic dynamics, which is pretty much how most of society thinks and all of that. And I understand that. I definitely do understand that. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. And that is for a whole other video that I may or may not even really share my thoughts on for another few months to maybe even a few years. But I do think that in reimagining intimacy for us as a society, and me being somebody who's always trying to then practice this and put it into practice and see how practical it is, it really helps to then have these kind of thoughts and then put them into practice in my dynamics. And I learn a lot from them myself. I then learn even more of the nuances and depths of like what works, what doesn't work, what can be tweaked, stuff like that. And then my hope is to then teach people how to engage more closely, more vulnerably, more intimately. And maybe, who knows, even if all of society doesn't get to that idealistic intimacy point that I have, or that vision of intimacy that I have, there will continue to be pockets of society, small communities or small groups or small friend groups and stuff like that, where they actually do have that kind of freedom. There probably already is. I'm not making it seem like, like, I know King Solomon once said there's nothing new under the sun. So I'm probably not the first person to think about all of this. But I still want to share this, and I still want this to be like ripples that I'm sending to hopefully provoke thought for whoever's watching here. And maybe then this will also help you understand if you have an ENFJ friend, or even potentially an INFJ friend in your life, who sometimes you'll think, and I think this is more common with the ENFJs, because again, the ENFJs with the tertiary SE, it's like they'll have the thoughts, but then unlike the INFJ who's like, I'm going to sit and think about this, like, for a lot longer, and I'm going to take a lot less risks. The ENFJ is like, okay, well, in order to really, again, field test this, and because I'm more comfortable with improvising and all of that, I'm going to take the risk. FE is a dominant function. You're going to take more risks, just like the SE dom who's like a little bit more clumsy. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to take the risk and jump into the water because I trust my body enough to be able to get myself out of the water. Whereas like somebody who doesn't trust their body, it's like, let me not risk that. So with being an FE dom, I remember Antonio said that sometimes an FE dom may even create conflict because they are aware of their ability to be able to, like, maybe fix it or maybe recover from it or whatever it might be. That's not to say that's a good thing. I would like to think that I avoid that. I don't like to create conflict, especially unnecessary conflict, especially being a 9. But this is something that I've noticed, that it being a constant thing in my mind, always thinking about like how to, again, improve society's view of intimacy and depth and connection in the way that I subjectively think about it. I have to field test it in my one-on-one dynamics that are close, and then in my group dynamics, and then have conversations and calibrate and learn from mistakes that I've had. And then it's like, okay, well, if I make a new friend, then slowly go about it this way, and boom, boom. And let's see where things go from there. And then, of course, share with you guys so that I can see what you guys think. So I think that's everything. I'm curious what you guys think about this. I know that I've said a lot of bizarre things. Maybe some of you are watching like, no, this isn't bizarre at all. Denzel, I think about this all the time. Or like, oh yeah, my ENFJ friend, she would be saying stuff like this too, but now I understand her more. Maybe some of you are like, oh no, like I turned this off a long time ago, which I know then you wouldn't be watching right now. But anyway, what do you think? I'm very curious. I would love conversation to go on in the comment section. If you like, tell me some of your thoughts, calibrate with me. If you want to discuss one-on-one, book a session with me, and we can talk about it for an hour and some change in a coaching session. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, leave me a like. I really appreciate it. And last but not least, I just thank you for watching, taking this time to watch, hopefully with the non-judgmental ear. And do not forget, you matter. Done. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. And if you enjoyed that, please like and subscribe. It actually really helps out my channel a lot, so that more people who actually care about what I want to say can actually find me a lot more easier. Also, if you did enjoy it, then maybe you'll enjoy a lot of my other content as well. So be sure to check out some of my playlists where you'll be able to find a lot of my older videos and older content. And last but not least, if you would like any profiling sessions or coaching sessions, be sure to check out denzelmensah.com, where you'll be able to book me and you'll see the rest of my services. But thanks again, and have a great day.